How's it going, everyone, and welcome in for another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We have a lot to get to in this one. Some great outings over the weekend from some WCC squads, Oregon State, USF, Santa Clara, some disappointing results, St. Mary's and Gonzaga. We're also at the stage of the season where we can start to talk about the resumes. We are starting to see teams be a little bit more solidified in what their metrics look like. The Nets, SRO, Ken Palm, all of these things, they're starting to take shape in a more definitely in a more cohesive way, because now we know what these teams are. We have a little bit more data on all of the rest of college basketball. So we're starting to see these teams position themselves. And we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as how each of these WCC teams have done so on that front. We'll also kind of go over some of the injuries that could end up impacting what we see moving forward. We did get one confirmation. We already kind of knew Cedric Howard was going to miss a long time. Now it is going that he will miss the rest of the season. So we'll get into what that and some other injuries that looks like that could be damaging that happened over the course of the weekend as well. But let's start with a recap on some of the key matchups that did happen over the weekend, and maybe some ramifications of what this is going to be. And we're going to start with Gonzaga taking that loss at Madison Square Garden to UConn, 77-71. And going into this one, I was saying that this is a would-be nice game for the Zags. Now, prefacing that now they have now lost back-to-back games, and it's the first time they have done that since 2018. It's the third straight year they've lost to UConn, which obviously is not going to be a great feeling for anyone in the Gonzaga camp, fan or otherwise. But you also had to look at that Gonzaga's level of expectation was also greater than everybody else's. That yes, they are 7-3. 3 losses at this stage of the season isn't a great look for a team that's possibly thinking about, I can be a 1 seed, I could be a 2 seed. The 3 losses, despite the fact of who it is, UConn, West Virginia, and Kentucky, they're 3 really good teams, but still 3 losses in the non-conference. They're not going to get a ton of help the rest of the way. They do have UCLA in just another week and a half or another couple weeks. And that is obviously a great opportunity to kind of help build that resume. And that might become a must win for the Zags if they think about getting back into that 1 seed, 2 seed conversation. But the one concerning trend, if we're going to say there's a concerning trend, because the metrics still love the Zags, is late game execution. It became a problem again in this contest. It's where do you go? We know that Ryan Emhart has been one of the best point guards in college basketball, if not the best point guard in all of the sport. But we've also seen that he's had a harder and harder time getting the looks that maybe he wants to, as defenses, more talented defenses start to clamp down on them. Kentucky obviously is long and tall. Same goes for UConn. They're really athletic as well. It became more problematic, and also has become more problematic even for someone like Caleb Fattle, who, while he's played really well in these contests, obviously, especially in the game in New York, he's a New Jersey native. He really played well in that game. But there is a little bit of a book on what to do with Battle, and it really is take away that right hand, because we know he is almost unstoppable when he's going right into the basket. But if you can force him to do anything else, you're going to at least stand a better chance of slowing him down. We've also seen, at least in this game, a lack of presence from Graham Ike and Nolan Hickman. The 2 of them in this game combined for 3 points, 1 rebound, 1 assist. That from 2 starters on this squad is not good. That is one that is almost an unacceptable level of not showing up in a contest like this. And we've seen both of them come up big in some bigger moments. Obviously, Graham Ike had a huge game just last week against Kentucky. And Nolan Hickman, can find his spots. Like, you're not going to rely on him to be like a 15 point per game scorer. You're not going to rely on him to take over a game all that often, but you are hoping that he's going to be able to hit those open 3-pointers, to be able to give you that look. And we just haven't seen that we did not see that from Nolan Hickman on Saturday. And they've also started to go long stretches without getting baskets in some of these contests. I really like this stat that Connor Hope put out on Twitter, that Gonzaga has played 7 games against top 60 opponents, and he did the plus minus for all of the kind of like the quarters of the game. And the shocking one was out of the halftime huddle going into the second half. First 10 minutes of the first half, plus 33. Second 10 minutes of the first half, plus 34. Second 10 minutes of the second half, plus 26. But the first 10 minutes of the second half, minus 24. And that is a number that just leaps out and shows that you have teams making adjustments against the Zags, and it is taking them quite a while to make the adjustments back. And that is a troubling sign when now we have 7 games worth of data to pull from on that front. That right out of the second half gate, they really have struggled. And they've allowed teams back into ball games. They've allowed teams to pull away. We saw that against Kentucky. They were up by 19 and allowed them back in, and obviously they lost that contest. They were up against UConn, and they let them back into the contest. They have let teams back into games when they really shouldn't be letting them back into games, especially when you have, again, a backcourt that should be able to get buckets and be one of the more kind of stabilizing groups in all of college basketball. If you have the best point guard, you think that you're going to survive some of these long stretches and be able to kind of get out of it on the positive end. And we just haven't seen that in the last couple nights. Again, this is not me saying that Ryan Nembhard is a problem, because he's not. This is a collective problem because we're not seeing enough offensive options in late game scenarios. And it can't be all just on 2 guys. We saw the Gonzaga bigs not convert on a lot of bunnies in this one. We saw them make too many unforced errors a lot of times, and that is problematic for the Zags. And that is, if you're going to look at one area that they need to fix, it's a lot of it is of their own doing. They need to find another scorer. They need to fix some of the things that they can take care of. And with back-to-back losses, which is obviously an unusual thing for the Zags, yes, there's a lot of the sky is falling. It's starting to feel almost like what we were hearing last year at the same time, that the Zag team doesn't have it. They're not this. They're not that. But this Zag team is in a far better position than where they were a year ago. Last year at this stage, we were talking about Gonzaga as if they weren't going to make the NCAA tournament. That this was a team that not only could break the Sweet 16 streak, but also could be a team that just wouldn't make the dance altogether. And as we saw, that was not the case last year. This team is now we're just talking about like, they're not going to be a 1 or a 2 seed. Even if we say like Gonzaga is going to roll out and do what we think that they're going to, even despite some challenges here or there, there's still a 3 or a 4 right now. And I don't think that's kind of like the bottom of what I think the Zags will end up being as we get deeper and deeper into the season. There's still 6 in KenPom. There's still 4 in the net. They still have a 4 in the SRO. There's still 5 in Bartorvik. There's all 3 losses are by fewer than 10 points. 2 of these 3 are absolutely going to be NCAA tournament teams and are probably going to be on that short list of title contenders. The third, West Virginia, we will see, because injuries have kind of taken their toll on that program. So TBD on what that game ends up looking like down the road. But this Zag team is going, right now, it's still things to fix, but we are way away from this being a fire alarm, red alert, and that there is something actually wrong with the Zag team. I will say, though, this. The game against UCLA in a couple of weeks, I think is going to be big. I think that is a game that the Zags, it's almost a must-win because you have to get back off the deck. Now, yes, they have the Nichols game coming up, which is obviously going to break likely obviously like kill them and break the streak, but break the losing streak. At the same time, they need another big win to kind of turn the narrative around. And even for within their own locker room, this show that like, no, we can still do this. We've got this, but we need to fix some of the things we can control. And seeing that UCLA team, a very good UCLA team that we've seen to this point, is going to be another one of those really good tests for them down at Intuit Dome in a couple weeks. Now, one of the teams that had maybe the best win of their season, did have their best win of the season, in what was a must-win in my mind, was Oregon State. Oregon State took on, at the time, 9-0 UC Irvine, and this was a game that Oregon State, while it was pretty close and kind of back and forth throughout, was a game that never felt out of control of the Beavers. They really did kind of hold Irvine at bay essentially the entire game. They would get up by double digits. Irvine would cut back into the lead, but it never felt like Irvine was going to turn it up and actually be able to overtake Oregon State in this one. They controlled it from beginning to end. They fought through maybe a few many turnovers that we're used to seeing this team play with. They played with pace. They played with toughness, which we've seen all season long. DeMarco Minor had a really big night. And this win, that sort of win, validates what we have seen to this point with Oregon State. This was a team that was 6-2 going in, weren't quite sure what to make of them because they hadn't really beaten anybody of note. The two losses were to good teams, Oregon, North Texas. And if either of those games had been a win instead of a loss, we would have been thinking about this team in a different way. They needed a win that was going to say, no, this is actually a team that is pointed in the right direction and has proven it on the court that they are going to continue to be the team that we've seen to this point of the season. Irvine is a really good team. They're going to continue to be a good team. That is going to just be a win that gets better and better for Oregon State as the season goes along. And we're starting to also see metrically how like this team is back into the conversation, really into an at-large conversation. They went all the way up to 42 in the net. They're still hanging around the 50s in KenPom. This is a team that now is starting to make moves. And we'll talk a little bit more later about just how close some of these teams are, just like the number of opportunities they still have to be able to kind of get back into it. They have the Diamond Head Classic coming up just at the end of this week. They started at the end of this week, so that's another good shot for Oregon State. They're going to need the Diamond Head. Like, they need to take care of all the teams that are sub them right now. Once they get the WCC play, we'll see, because again, like I think there's going to be a lot of cannibalization of the top half of the league between Oregon State, Santa Clara, USF, Washington State, St. Mary's. I'm going to even throw Gonzaga in there because I do think that the pack has gotten a little closer together. Just even though the expectations for Gonzaga are high, I think that they have some of their challenges that we've seen have moved them closer to the pack. And so there's not as much separation as I think we thought there was going to be at the beginning of the year. Now, one of those teams that also got a must-win was USF. Getting a win over also another undefeated team in Loyola. This one, the Dons had to go on the road and play in Milwaukee for this neutral site game. They won at 76-66. And this was Malik Thomas just taking over the ball game. He had 35 points in this one. Like, he was so good in the second half. Like, he pretty much can get whatever he wanted. Ryan Beasley, who we hadn't seen much from this season, really came through off the bench. And you can just see how much of a different team this is when Beasley is playing well. They go from maybe borderline tournament team to a team that looked like it could do damage when he's playing well. And another thing that we saw in this one is that we saw a lot of bench contributions. Barry Wong coming off the bench, he had a big night. He played a ton of minutes in this contest, and I think that was a really good sign for what we saw. He had played 29 minutes, 7 points, 7 rebounds. Viniamin Abosi also came off the bench and played. He didn't play much, 9 minutes, but 5 points, 4 rebounds, a block, 2 fouls, 2 turnovers. He did fill up the box score in his limited time. And that happened because Duito Newberry did leave the game early with an injury. He only played 4 minutes in this contest. So again, we'll talk about what that might mean without necessarily any report of like what the long-term thing is. Was this an injury that we'll see him back in later this week? Or is this something that that the Dons are going to have to deal with a little bit longer and see what that's going to look like moving forward? But USF has also put themselves in position. They needed a win. They needed one like this to validate as well. Now, they already had the win against Boise, but they missed an opportunity against Memphis. They missed an opportunity against Clemson. They beat up on a St. Louis team, which really doesn't look like much anymore. That is a St. Louis team that has lost kind of all its luster at this point for various reasons, but not nearly the value game that we all thought it was going to be, that I thought it was going to be. Now, they do get Bradley this week, which is going to be another great chance for USF. This is a Bradley team that just is coming off of a loss to Santa Clara, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But USF has put themselves in a good position to be in that at-large conversation as well. They've moved up to 45 in the net. So another team that's a top 50 squad in the WCC, as we're starting to see the top half of the league really separate itself, and really actually got separate itself from the bottom half, but just jumbled up here in the maybe like the mid 50-ish range of the net. So Santa Clara, maybe the team that needed a win more than anybody. We're desperate for a win because of how it all started. And they got that much needed win against Bradley in Henderson, 84-74. Mahi, Stewart, Tilly, all with 20-plus points. It did get a little hairy in the second half, but they were able to kind of come out of that late. They did have an extended scoring drought again, but they did enough. Bradley shot well from 3, which is a little bit of a concern because this is something that Santa Clara has not really done all that well, is defend the 3. But Santa Clara just shot it better. They were 12 for 24 from distance. They moved to 6-5. They're back over the 500 mark for the first time, obviously, since the start of the season. And now, this is a Santa Clara team that it itself has kind of drug itself up out of the mud. They're sitting at 78 in the net. They're sitting in the 70s in KenPom. They actually, along with Gonzaga and Washington State, have the most top 100 wins of anyone in the WCC. And even the losses that they have are actually aging maybe a little better than we originally thought as well. As an example, like the 3 losses that they have, you really actually think about the 3 losses that they have are two of them are top 100 teams, and the other one is Washington at 120. Again, the surprise is North Dakota State, the one we all said was terrible, quad 4 loss, whatever else. They are now a top 100 team. They have played really well, North Dakota State has. Over the course of the non-conference, they're sitting at, I think it's 97 in the net. And while it still does count as a quad 3 loss for Santa Clara, and it's a game they still should have won, that is one that's not looking nearly as bad as it did just a couple weeks ago. So the Broncos are looking in a much better position than they were just a little while ago. And maybe, just maybe, they're starting to do what St. Mary's did last season. We know the talent is there. We just didn't see it start to come together. And what we have seen over the last couple of weeks is it start to come together. And speaking of St. Mary's, they also went into the weekend with a would-be nice game and did lose at Boise. Technically a neutral site in Idaho Falls, but this was a obviously heavy Boise State crowd. They lost in overtime 67-65. It was a brutal ending to regulation, a brutal ending in overtime. Magustas Marshallonis had multiple looks and good looks at the end of regulation, at the end of overtime, and just could not convert. This is a game where we also saw another injury. Paulos Morauskas left the game early in this one and did not return. And we saw St. Mary's do something we hadn't seen really at all, and they went to a double big lineup. They had Mitchell Saxon playing the 4, and you had Andrew McKeever largely stepping in to play those minutes, and he looked good again in this one. He played 25 minutes in this contest, 9 points, 8 rebounds. He is really starting to come through as being like the real backup at the center spot on this squad, because we've seen it now in back-to-back games, Utah and Boise State, that he is now starting to separate himself on that bench unit. And it was working for a long stretches of time. It got that double big lineup, got them back into the game, because it really just added an element that Boise State just could not match up against. It was just, they were too big. St. Mary's was inside. And for a team that relies so much on its size and its toughness, this was one of the tougher challenges Boise has had. And I did say that now, they did lose this game. You can kind of point to, like, they got down too early. They got down way too much early on. They did not convert late. They could not find another scoring option down the stretch. And we've seen this a few times from St. Mary's as well over the course of the season. We saw it against ASU. We saw it against UTSA. We saw it against Utah, that they kind of at times have struggled to find that guy when they need a bucket. Now, I also said that for them, this would be a nice game. And it is. Like, this was one where they've already had a couple of big wins. Now, what happened in the metrics that did not help St. Mary's is that ASU took a big loss and Nebraska took a big loss. And now some of those wins have kind of been dragged down a little bit more, that had more value for St. Mary's and now don't have as much of value as we originally thought. So that kind of pushed St. Mary's back to the pack with everybody else. So now we're looking at a top 5 of the WCC, top 1, 2, 3, 4, actually 6 of the WCC, where you have Gonzaga at 4, Oregon State at 42, St. Mary's 43, USF 45, Washington State 67, and Santa Clara at 78. And I think we've long talked about how the WCC is probably going to be, no matter what, is a 2-bid. And everyone has assumed Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and then maybe a third could get into the conversation. Right now, it does look like we have at least 4 who are solidly in the conversation and another 2 who are going to make a play. And all of this is largely going to be dependent upon how they play against each other the rest of the way. Because there's actually a lot of quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities. And for almost all these teams, there's maybe one or two left in the non-conference that's going to help them out on that front. It's all about these conference games. And for St. Mary's, for USF, for the WCC teams that came in from the Pac-12, this is going to be a little bit of an unusual thing, where you're going to have a lot of squads who are going to count as quad 1 and quad 2 games. Gonzaga is going to count. Oregon State's going to count. St. Mary's is going to count. USF's going to count. Washington State's going to count. Santa Clara is going to count. Now, after that, it gets a lot of quad 3 and quad 4s. So don't lose to anybody else in the conference. But the top half of this league now has a lot of potential to get big wins and get them in and really start to move and separate themselves from the rest of the conference. Take a look at OSU. So right now that they are 0-2 versus quad 1, 1-0 versus quad 2. They have 5 quad 1 games left. They have 6 quad 2 games left. That's assuming what the metrics what the net looks like as of right now. St. Mary's already has a quad 1 win. They're 1-2 against that group. Quad 2, they're 1-0. They have 6 quad 1s left. They have 5 quad 2s. USF, they have yet to win a quad 1, but they have 2 quad 2 victories. So they're also in that category of they have 2 quad 1, quad 2 wins. St. Mary's has 2 quad 1, quad 2 wins. Washington State has 3 of these said wins, with still opportunities for 5 more quad 1 games and 6 more quad 2s. They have a ton of opportunity left to help their resume, and we know that the Cougars have played really well at this point, but the metrics still, again, like they're at 67, even though like they have more quad 1, quad 2s than any of the others I've said outside of Santa Clara and Gonzaga. It's because they don't have the vanity win. I talked about it over the weekend. Like, this is a squad that needs a blowout. They need a 20-point win. They need a 30-point win against somebody. It doesn't even matter who it is. They need one. And sure, there's going to be actually plenty of opportunities in WCC play to get some of those. Like, sorry, Portland. Sorry, Pepperdine. Sorry, San Diego. But there's going to be some opportunities for those games to get those big blowout victories. And everyone's going to be gunning for these. You're going to need to win a lot of these WCC games against the bottom half with some style points. If you're Oregon State, if you're St. Mary's, you're USF. Now, USF and St. Mary's have kind of proven they're kind of the examples of take care of your business against the teams you can. I mean, USF is like already has a 30-point win, already has a 40-point win against some teams. That's how like they've actually moved up so quickly, is because the vanity metrics, all of the analytics love those wins, even if it doesn't matter if you beat them by 20, you beat them by 30. The computer does care. And they do still have to pick up, obviously, key wins. They still have to beat the Boise's. They still have to beat the Loyolas. But just adding those in is helpful for the end result when we get to March. When that sheet of paper is thrown down and you look at the team sheet and everything else, those 30, 40-point wins, regardless of who they're against, do make a difference. And so that's going to be the challenge, I think, moving forward, is winning some of those opportunities that you do get, but then just you're going to have to kick the out of some of these squads. And whoever can do that more often is going to be in better position to get an at-large bid. And I'm not completely sold at this stage that Gonzaga is going to run away with the league. Keep in mind that, like, I mean, St. Mary's, while a lot of people could say, like, well, they didn't do it, that it wasn't like an overwhelming, like, they won the league by 1 game last season against Gonzaga. Against a Gonzaga squad that maybe was still trying to find itself, didn't actually play all that well, whatnot. It's still largely the same team that we saw a year ago with this squad. The biggest difference, obviously, is Caleb Battle is on this team, and you're missing maybe the best defender that Gonzaga's ever had in Anton Watson. St. Mary's is like, they bring back the player of the year. They bring back the defensive player of the year. They lost 3 starters as well. But they look better now than they did at this time a year ago. So who's to say that this St. Mary's team won't be actually better than what we saw a year ago? OSU is going to be in the mix in this one. Washington State's going to be in the mix. USF has been knocking on the door for years. Santa Clara has the talent. We've just been waiting for them to break through. We're only a couple of weeks out from the start of WCC play, and these top 6 teams have really started to kind of each make the case that they could win this thing. They're going to do damage in league. And do I think that there's going to be some beating up on some of these teams? Yeah, because I think we've seen it in the past that USF and Santa Clara have kind of beaten up on each other and maybe have cost each other a potential at-large bid. We've seen it obviously, like Pac-12 teams like OSU and Washington State are kind of used to that sort of thing in the Pac-12 of teams just beating up on each other and maybe bumping each other down rather than raising each other up. But that's what we're going to see, I think, in the WCC this year. This is going to be one of the tougher fought races I think we've seen in a long, long time. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see where this all goes. I mean, we had LMU, I think, was in the 6th slot, and Oregon State was picked the 7th. They will not be 7th. Like what we have seen to this point, Oregon State is not going to be us sitting behind LMU. And I could see any one of these teams ending up being 2nd. I could see any one of these teams ending up being 6th. This is going to be a fun conference year. We still got a couple weeks left to see how this all shakes out, but what we have seen so far in the non-conference should have anyone who's been following the WCC really excited about what we are going to witness throughout the course of conference play. Now, I will say just a couple notes about some of these injuries. And as I mentioned, that Cedric Howard was already announced that he will be out for the season after his shoulder surgery. So obviously a big blow for the Cougars. But we've already seen them play a few games without him and obviously be very successful without him. I think they're 4-1 since he's gone down. So they've been able to pick it up and play really well without him. Luwan Watts has been really good. Isaiah Watts has played really well in his absence. We've seen great performances from Dane Erikstroop. We've seen, this is a squad that does have a lot of depth. They've been able to find their offense from multiple spots. They've played better defense over the last couple weeks as well. So they're almost becoming the team, maybe like the team that maybe we thought they would be in March, but we already are seeing that in December. This is maybe one of the better turnarounds and coaching jobs that we've seen in all of college basketball, because this was a brand new team, brand new coaching staff, brand new expectations, and they have not disappointed and have probably exceeded most anyone's expectations of what Washington State would have been at this stage. Now the two injuries that are going to be interesting, Paulus Morauskas for St. Mary's and Duito Newberry at USF. There's no word for either one of them what the injuries are, what the duration could be. What we do know is that Morauskas did leave the game. He only played 14 minutes in that contest before sitting out the rest of it. Duito Newberry left after only 4 minutes against Loyola. These are two key guys for both of these squads. We saw that Morauskas can be a go-to guy for the Gales when he's had in 29 against Utah. We've seen him be one of the better players that the WCC is going to see this season, and his absence is going to raise a lot of questions for St. Mary's, because who steps into that role? Who steps into that starting job as well? It's if he is out. Do we see more of Ashton Hardaway in that spot? And I do think that there's definitely scenarios where we are going to see more action from Hardaway in that role. I think he's done a really good job kind of starting to fill into some of these spots. We've also seen really good play out of Andrew McKeever. And so does St. Mary's just go double big on a more regular basis? And then you still have Harry Wessels as that third center to be able to kind of mix in there as well. Or do we start to see St. Mary's maybe go smaller at a little bit more often? Maybe it's Luke Barrett slides down to the 4 and we start to see more 3-guard sets from the Gales. And that could also be an option of what they do if Morauskas does have to miss significant time. At the very least, what we have seen, if McKeever is going to be that guy, this creates a different problem for opponents of the Gales. Like if McKeever and Saxon are in there at the same time, you have 6'10" and 7'3" as your 4 and 5, and that becomes like an NBA sized front court, which is going to be really tough to handle for anyone in the WCC, really. Now, for USF with Duito Newberry, this becomes challenging because he's been their best post defender really all year long, and he's one of their leaders. If he has to miss any time, this is going to be a challenge for the Dons, because I don't think they're as deep, but we've already seen actually some immediate returns. Abosi and Wong both played really well against Loyola, and that's a good sign early on that you had two guys who were able to step in and really give you quality minutes. Abosi, he was still getting used to the college system. Like, he did come over from Greece, so he got over a little late. And I mean, in those 9 minutes, I said, like, he filled up the stat sheet, but 2 fouls, 2 turnovers. Going to have to give him some time to adjust and clean up some of those. But if you can get some solid production out of those two, and they're not a net negative, USF, I think, is going to be able to kind of weather this storm. And I think part of that is going to be if Ryan Beasley can continue to play well off the bench as well. Like, obviously they need Marcus Williams to step up and play a little bit better in some of these contests. But Malik Thomas has been outstanding all year long. Probably one of the on my short list for WCC Player of the Year at this stage. But Beasley can be one of those, like, 1A sort of guys. And if he can start to play well, as we saw just the other night, we get a little bit more out of Marcus Williams. If the bench continues to just play positive net basketball and don't have to necessarily fully step into that if Newberry's going to be out for a longer period of time, which, again, we don't know at this stage, they have options. And I think USF is actually going to maybe struggle a little bit, but it won't be a glaring difference in the way what we see the USF be able to do throughout the course of the rest of the non-conference. And then who knows what the duration of the injury might be. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to follow along on social media at Post by Zach and at Unofficial WCC Pod. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube and your favorite streaming service. I'll be back later this week to start to preview some of the upcoming games. USF and Bradley on Wednesday. We also have Washington State and Washington, which is a big one for the Cougs. They head over to Seattle to renew the in-state rivalry. And then, of course, later on in the week, we have a number of games going into the weekend. Utah State is heading to St. Mary's, so that's another big one on the WCC slate. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.